You would think by my third video in the History of Teyvat series that I would have finally found my footing and workflow, that my timelines would look well researched and not covered in question marks and post-it notes. I, however, underestimated the nation of wind and freedom, stories, and time. While some of the timeline was fairly straightforward, soon it became an interconnected web of political machinations and influences from those who might be from beyond Teyvat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As with most things, it's best if we start at the beginning, and for Mondstadt, that beginning starts with the Great War. Also, as a brief aside, I try really hard to pronounce things right in this, but just know that if I say something wrong, I hate myself far more than you could ever hate me. And with that, let's get into it. The Great War is mentioned by Neuvillette as the time where Celestia finally managed to banish the dragons and wrestle back control of Teyvat. In Mondstadt, it seems as if the fighting must have been far off, as it's not mentioned by any records. Instead, there is a civilization built upon a mountain that would be known as Dragonspine in the present, a civilization full of refugees fleeing from the land of snow and strife. This civilization became known as Sal Vindagnyr, or Sal Vindagnyr? Sal Vindagnyr? Something like that. Named for the verdant and lush mountaintop the civilization thrived on. This mountain had natural resources, such as star silver ore, which was said to make legendary weapons. While the civilization prospered with the divine blessings of Celestia, eventually, its prosperity would come to an unfortunate and tragic end. A branch of the Irminsul tree had established itself on the mountain. Those who lived there worshipped the tree. The kings and priests would venture to the tree to divine their fortunes and futures from Celestia. But that changed once a princess was born beneath the boughs of the tree. This princess was born with the special blessings from Celestia, able to predict the future and divine the fortunes of her people. As she grew up, she foresaw a poison that would spread and ultimately destroy the mountain. This poison would be born from a dragon we know to be Durin. And a short time after this, Celestia sent down a sky nail upon the land, causing it to become shrouded with snowstorms and thick clouds. An outlander named Ermenlacher, or Emenlacher, something like that, lived in the kingdom during this time, and the princess grew to love him. She granted him a sword made of star silver as he left to try and find a way to save the civilization. She told him that she would dedicate a fresco to him and wait for his return. But he never heard these words, as the snowstorm that raged around them was too loud. After this, while the princess was working on another fresco for her father noticed that the trees were starting to wither, and he ventured up the mountain to seek guidance from Celestia, asking his daughter to finish her third fresco, stating that if it was of thawing ice and snow, then all would be well. But by then, the princess had forgotten what green grass looked like, just as she forgot what the calm azure sky might have looked like above the clouds. Because of this, she was unable to finish her third fresco. During this time, the Skyfrost nail split into 3 pieces, causing more and more damage to the mountain below, and destroying the Irminsul tree. Noticing this, the princess tried to save the tree by grafting it to another, but ultimately the tree withered and died, the princess dying atop its roots. The kingdom scribe attempted to heal the ley lines, but by then it was too late. And with his final breath, he cursed Celestia and Imenlacher, who he felt had abandoned the princess, stating that he hoped a land with no gods would rise and defeat Celestia. All within Sal Vindagnyr had succumbed to their fate, and Imenlacher, upon returning, had discovered the tragedy. He vowed to pass time with a song of iron and blood, leaving Sal Vindagnyr in search of a land full of war for him to fight in. He also abandoned the sword the princess had given him upon the mountain. One might note that a land full of war might refer to Notlan, just as a land of snow and strife might refer to Snezhnaya, but that's a theory for another day. What is known is that Ermenlacher's descendants would form the Ermenlacher clan, and they would fight for the entertainment of gods and kings and live around Mondstadt, at least by the end of the Archon War. The next era we know of is the Interim Era. This is a time of relative peace after the end of the Great War, but before the official start of the Archon War. During this time, Mondstadt is very similar to what it is in the present, lush and green, and filled with heavy winds. The exact timing of this period is also up for debate, as we don't have exact dates to work with, possibly having something to do with the eventual disappearance of the God of Time. But again, theory for another day. Essentially, I'm going to list a bunch of things that did happen around this time, but just know that the exact timing of itself will be off. Sometime during this period, there was an ancient civilization on Star Snatch Cliff that established the Sommernachtgarten, and when the civilization fell, the Sommernachtgarten, I definitely pronounced it wrong there, was buried underground, eventually becoming the Midsummer Courtyard in the modern day. An ancient civilization also resided on the Windwhale Highland and established the Cecilia Garden, where they grew Cecilias, surprising no one. This civilization appears to be an offshoot from Decarabian civilization, as he was gaining power and influence during this time. But there's no official in-game information confirming or denying this, it's just that the architecture does kind of look similar to other buildings we know Decarabian built during this time. Speaking of Decarabian, he was gaining power and influence during this time. He established his capital city, which he named Mondstadt. In the present, this is known as Old Mondstadt, around Storm Terror's lair, and his territory seemed to encompass the Bright Crown Mountains and Windwhale Highland area, and as far south as the waypoint between the Dawn Winery and the Stone Gate. There is also evidence that the Bright Crown Mountains used to be full of Decarabian soldiers. These soldiers appeared to guard the entrance of the city. This city was laid out in a semicircle around Decarabian's tower, and each citizen was assigned their place within the city, indicating that there was quite a lot of restriction for the people, especially in regards to where they could go and what they could do. Additionally, Decarabian's tower appears to have a large underground portion that is currently unexplorable in the game. This will likely become accessible in later updates and might have some pretty big lore significance and offer more insight on what life was like under the rule of Decarabian. At some point during this period where Decarabian was gaining power, Boreas met with a god and became known as the King of the North Wind after gaining powers from this ancient god. The god from which Boreas gained these powers remains unknown, but it seems as if it was a god older than both Decarabian and Boreas, so it is potentially a possibility that this could be another instance of Istaroth involving herself with the affairs of Mondstadt, as she is the only other named god that was worshipped within Mondstadt. After a short while, Mondstadt is filled with blizzards, turning it into an inhospitable wasteland. These blizzards were caused by Boreas, and potentially because he declared war on Decarabian, but just as likely could have been accidental on the Wolf King's part. To protect his people from the blizzards, Decarabian raised a wall of wind around his city, effectively jailing all of the people inside. That which lurks within and animates this relic are the divine remains of lamenting gods. They are unrealized ideals, designs for a prosperous humanity that could never be. The Age of Kings, which takes place during the Archon War and effectively is the Archon War in the region of Mondstadt, starts when Boreas declares war on Decarabian, believing that he should rule over humanity instead. Boreas tries many times to attack Mondstadt, but is never able to break through the storm barrier that Decarabian put up. This war between the two kings of ice and frost therefore turned into a stalemate, and as time continued to pass, humanity began to resent Decarabian for stripping them of their agency and freedom, coming to view him as a despot and tyrant. Inside the storm barrier, there was a young man known as the Nameless Bard who befriends a tiny wind spirit. This wind spirit would eventually become Barbatos, but during this time, it seems as if Barbatos had very little power, only able to change his shape and come and go from the storm barrier. It is also around this time that a clan decides to chance the storm barrier and the lands that lay beyond their home. The Gunhildr clan ventures out past the storm barrier and finds the rest of the nation completely inhospitable, unable to return, but unable to live, they begin praying to any gods that will listen to give them aid and help them find a way to survive in this never-ending blizzard. Barbatos heard the prayers of those within the blizzards and decided to respond. So too did the God of Time. While it isn't clear what the God of Time did, what is certain is that Barbatos gained enough power from the prayers of the Gunhildr clan and likely from the God of Time to create shelter for them, seemingly granting them a reprieve from the blizzards, at least enough for them to be able to farm and establish themselves. As a quick aside, there's a very popular theory within the community that Venti is an incarnation of the God of Time, or is perhaps the God of Time herself. However, with the reveal of Xbalanque and Renova, I want to propose that instead, Barbatos struck a deal with Istaroth in order to gain the powers needed to aid the Gunhildr clan. I don't have time to go into this idea in depth, but I thought I'd insert it here just as food for thought. It is at some point during this period that wine is first brewed in Mondstadt. As the legend goes, a certain mischievous wind spirit took the form of a fox and fermented some apples under a guard's watch, and when the guard bit into the apple, he found that he enjoyed the taste so much that he used the juice to create the first wine. Wine was said to make a person forget the past, and was used so that people could have the strength to keep fighting in their harsh environment. It is likely that this event occurred before the fall of Old Mondstadt, as Barbatos doesn't really seem to shapeshift himself after becoming an Archon. Not that he doesn't have the ability to, just that he chooses not to. This might be another piece of the puzzle also that the God of Time represents in Mondstadt. Inside Old Mondstadt, the flames of rebellion continue to grow, and the Windbloom is used as a code word amongst those that intend to resist the reign of the God King. A red-haired warrior was the first to take up arms and is very likely one of Diluc's ancestors. Decarabian's people rise up in a full-on revolt led by the nameless bard, the red-haired warrior, a leader of the Gunhildr clan, and Amos, Decarabian's former lover. Many fight and die during this battle, Barbatos using the power he has amassed to aid as much as he can. Decarabian is struck down, as is Amos and the nameless bard. It is in this moment that Barbatos ascends to true godhood and chooses to take the form of the nameless bard to honor him, and takes up the bow to honor Amos. It's shortly after this that Boreas, upon seeing the truth behind human society and the fact that his blizzards cannot truly nurture life, decides to allow his physical body to die, allowing his powers to flow back into Mondstadt and nourish the earth. His spirit would eventually take up residence in Wolvendom, and he becomes a guardian spirit of sorts for Mondstadt. After the rebellion, much happens in quick succession. For reasons that are unknown, the red-haired warrior becomes disillusioned with Barbatos, turning his back on the new god. But, as stated, eventually this warrior sires the Ragvindr family, which has acted as protectors of Mondstadt throughout the centuries. Using his power, Barbatos reshapes Mondstadt, using his winds to blow away snow and ice, and terraforming the rest of Mondstadt, much like he did for the Gunhildr clan, though on a much larger scale. Barbatos also eradicated Pylos Peak, which today is Musk Reef. Barbatos then leads the people from the old city to Cider Lake, where they begin to rebuild the city of Mondstadt. The three clans that rise to prominence in this era are the Gunhildr clan, the Immenlacher clan, and the Lawrence clan. The God of Time works alongside Barbatos to ensure Mondstadt's protection, and both were worshipped, though eventually the God of Time is forgotten, and Barbatos seems to assume the role she played in Mondstadt's history. It is possible that the disappearance of these records of the God of Time have something to do with the aristocracy period, as they repressed certain information about Mondstadt's history to control the population. The post-Archon War period of Mondstadt's history is known as the aristocratic period, as this was the period of time that the great clans ruled over Mondstadt, not unlike nobility or kings. Sometime in the very beginning of this era, a new elemental dragon was born, and this would be Dvalin, a dragon born of pure animo energy located in the high heavens. It doesn't seem as if Dvalin has any relationship to the dragon sovereigns, at least not of as recording this, and is just an elemental dragon, still quite rare, but not quite on the level as the sovereigns. Even so, Dvalin is, as stated, incredibly powerful and was said to have the ability to rival gods. But Barbatos befriended the dragon, and the dragon becomes one of the guardians of Mondstadt. In the beginning of this era, the Hexen Circle challenged Barbatos to a fight, but he refused, and asked to resolve their conflict through song instead. From then on, the group and Barbatos were allies, with Barbatos concealing one of the group's meeting places in Mondstadt along with its lantern. Barbatos eventually departs from Mondstadt, not wanting to become a tyrant, and leaving the ruling of Mondstadt to those who lived within its city. The clans that arose to power were said to have been blessed by the heavens and given divine powers, these likely being visions of some kind. The leader of the Lawrence clan would build a statue of Barbatos in front of the cathedral to commemorate the god. As stated previously, it seems as if early on in this era, people still worshipped both Barbatos and the God of Time, but the worship of the god of time slowly faded from the memory of the people in Mondstadt. It is during this period that many of the festivals and customs of Mondstadt were established. These were originally established by the aristocracy for the betterment of the common people of Mondstadt. These customs and festivals include hunting, previously a hobby for the aristocracy, now something that the common people and this aristocracy work together, doing this to bring meat and spoils to Mondstadt. The Ludi Harpastum, a 15-day festival which celebrates the blessings of wine, song, and flight which Barbatos bestowed upon Mondstadt. Many games and presents are given throughout this festival. It appears to be a festival that Barbatos is particularly fond of. The Wind Bloom, a festival that celebrates the Thousand Winds and the rebellion against Decarabian. In the present day, it's mostly a festival about finding love. Vine Levis Fest. Vine Levis's Fest. I had a friend who was trying to teach me how to say this word, and I guarantee I butchered it, and to him, I specifically apologize. But this is a festival that celebrates the return of the Anemo Archon and the west wind blowing during the harvest season. As I mentioned with the interim period, this period of Mondstadt's history doesn't have any firm dates for reasons that will become apparent soon, and I think I've organized everything in a way that makes sense, but take this timeline with a grain of salt. The Lawrence clan becomes the most influential clan in Mondstadt and becomes the main rulers of the city. They, however, unsurprisingly grow corrupt and become tyrants. They enslave and torment the common people and begin referring to themselves as kings. The Gunhildr clan supposedly does not follow this path, but they were less influential than the Lawrence clan, and therefore they were unable to do anything about their policies. The Immenlacher clan fades from history at this point, and their ultimate fate is left ambiguous. During this period, the aristocracy used various methods to control the population, both through force and through indoctrination. They suppressed knowledge about Mondstadt's past and hid away historical relics that could have given away such a past. Additionally, anyone who was suspected of harboring ill will towards the Lawrence clan was enslaved and forced to fight for their entertainment or to do hard labor. The Night Order during this time were known as the Starlit Knights, and they upheld the horrible practices of the Lawrence clan and used force to keep the population of Mondstadt subdued. Royal mages and high-ranking church officials twisted the truth of Mondstadt and Barbatos' origins to keep the population under the impression that this was how they were meant to be living. Sometime around 1,000 years ago, 3 big events began happening nearly simultaneously. I'll be covering all of them individually, but understand that they're all likely happening at the same time or nearly all at the same time. Eberhard was an illegitimate heir to the Landric clan, and because of this, he aimed to manipulate those around him until he was able to gain power. He was known as a cold and ruthless man, not above murder and betrayal so long as it was in pursuit of what he wanted. He wanted to reinstate the aristocracy's golden age, and to that end, he would begin orchestrating the aristocracy's downfall. Eberhard framed his older half-brother as a thief, causing him to flee from Mondstadt, which removed him from the line of succession in Eberhard's family. Due to this, he only had one more elder brother in the way. During this period, polearms were used by commoners and gladiators, and for that reason they were seen as distasteful and lowly weapons. Eberhard, though, recognizing that he would need every possible avenue available to him for power, began training with a polearm. He even became a disciple of the witch who created the crescent pike, manipulating her due to her love for his elder half-brother, using that to get close to her before ultimately killing her. He took up the lance as a way to gain an upper hand against his other older half-brother, Ingbert, who was a vision user. Eberhard also manipulated his family's gladiator slave into fighting for him even after he had technically gained back his freedom, causing the man to die by Vanessa's hands in a gladiator match. Eberhard had left the scene, leaving the gladiator to die alone. After the gladiator's death, the Landric clan organized an aristocracy-led expedition to Sal Vindagnyr. It's at this point, while the mountain is still cursed by the Skynails, it's not poisoned by Durin. And it's during this expedition that Eberhard's attempts to enact his final plan to assume control over the Landric family begin. Eberhard systematically begins manipulating everyone in the group to their deaths. Some he convinces to try to make their way to base camp despite the blizzards, causing them to freeze to death, while others he convinces to explore rooms, causing cave-ins to kill them, and those who escaped he just outright killed himself. Soon, Eberhard was alone with his older half-brother and another man. He attacks, gravely wounding both men, but before he can kill Ingbert, he uses his vision to force Eberhard to retreat. It's too late, however, as the other man dies, realizing what Eberhard's big plan is. After leaving, despite the fact that he's injured, Eberhard begins walking back towards where he left extra supplies, when his brother catches up to him. Eberhard manages to kill Ingbert and goes to the sea where he has a boat and supplies waiting. He intends to return to Mondstadt and assume control of the Landrick family. But he never returns. His fate is ultimately unknown. His co-conspirator, Priscilla, is caught and punished by the aristocracy as his plan was revealed. The next big event to happen is happening alongside Eberhard's plan, and it's the appearance of the Wanderers Troupe. The Wanderers Troupe was a group of musicians and also very skilled in combat. They were from various nations around Teyvat, and they were known also as the Swordsman Troupe, as they traveled around Teyvat facing unknown foes in places like the Mar Javari, before making a final stop in Mondstadt. Seeing the state of things, they attempted to overthrow the aristocracy, themselves in part because the Sojourner fell in love with a girl from Mondstadt who was to be sold to the Lawrence clan, as she was selected to be the princess of the Ludi Harpastum. The Dawnlight swordswoman during this also met with a knight who worked under the Lawrence clan. This knight was Diluc's ancestor and was known as Ragvindr. Upon meeting the swordswoman and realizing that things in Mondstadt did not need to be the way they were, he resolved himself to fight for Mondstadt's freedom. Unfortunately, all but one of the Wanderers' troop would be killed. 3 slain in battle. The Dawnlight swordswoman would be enslaved and forced to fight until she died. Even so, while she was enslaved, she never gave up singing songs of freedom and imploring those around her to question the aristocracy. The final member of the troupe was someone who had run away from the Lawrence clan, and due to that heritage, he was not killed. He did not give up resisting the aristocracy and instead established an underground organization which would remain active up until the Cataclysm, watching Mondstadt from the shadows. It's unclear if this is the organization that Diluc is a part of, but I think it's pretty likely. The third event would be the final nail in the coffin the aristocracy had been building for themselves for the last 600 years, and it would come in the form of a clan of outlanders. Vanessa and her clan were originally from Notlan, but had become nomadic, forgetting much of their roots in Notlan, and choosing to more or less roam Mondstadt. Eventually, they were pursued by Ursa the Drake, a powerful monster that prowled Mondstadt. Vanessa and her clan, when on the verge of starvation and death, would be enslaved by the aristocracy, given refuge from the monster, but forced to endure sickness and battles. Vanessa, being the strongest warrior of her clan, was sought after as a gladiator, as she both awed and terrified the aristocracy with her power. 1,000 years ago, during the final days of the Ludi Harpastum, the prayers and cries of the people of Mondstadt awakened Barbatos, and he returned to Mondstadt in the guise of a bard. He's in shock at the state of Mondstadt, and after he insults the heir to the Lawrence clan, he runs into and befriends Vennessa, who protects him from Barca Lawrence. Due to her transgression, she is jailed and forced to fight in battle after battle. Venti, or Barbatos, goes to her and offers to free her and her people. But she declines, stating that freedom given is just another form of a cage, and that she will fight for her clan's freedom. After fighting in a series of grueling fights, all of which she emerges victorious, Barca then tells her that if she's victorious in this final fight, not only will she win her clan's freedom, but also the keys to the city, before forcing all of the elderly and sick of her clan into the arena, summoning Ursa the Drake to attack them. At this moment, however, Venti sheds his guise and descends upon the battlefield, helping Vanessa prevail and forcing Ursa to flee. While the history of Mondstadt states that this is when Mondstadt was freed from the aristocracy, in truth, it was a long and bloody rebellion, one where Ragvindr and the former Wanderers' troop member would assist in defeating the aristocracy, and those within the church still loyal were mobilized by the Nameless Shepherd. Vanessa was ultimately the rebellion's leader, But Barbatos decided to intervene once more, forging a contract between the Lawrence clan and Morax, stating that they would sell all of their citizens to the Lord of Geo as slaves. By this point, very few remaining soldiers were loyal to the Lawrence clan, and this coming to light meant that they all abandoned their posts. The Lawrence clan was exiled from Mondstadt, and those who sided with them were also exiled from Mondstadt. But those who aided in the rebellion, like the Gunhildr and Ragvindr clans, were allowed to stay. Vanessa goes on to establish the Knights of Favonius, and she's the first Dandelion Knight and Grand Master. She also restores the Church of Favonius, ensuring that they can prevent tyrants from taking back over. Ragvindr also establishes the Mondstadt Library, which would become the largest library in all of northern Teyvat. But eventually, the Great Fire of the Fall Equinox reduced it to 1/6 of its original size. The Four Winds were officially established during this time, though Dvalin had long since been a part of Mondstadt. Boreas, the Wolf of the North, and Dvalin, the Dragon of the East. The other two winds are a bit difficult to pin down, which we'll touch on later. Vanessa, at the end of her life, is chosen by the gods to ascend to Celestia at Windrise, and a massive oak tree grows in its place. It's suspected that Vennessa becomes the Falcon of the West after her death and continues to protect Mondstadt as one of the Four Winds. This is why I said that the other two winds are a bit hard to place, as the other one is the Lion of the South, and we don't really know who that could be referring to. This tree also has a deep connection with Celestia, as Venti uses it frequently to heal himself. Arindolin, Rostan, and Rosaline are born prior to the Cataclysm. Arindolin and Rostam grew up together and become Knights of Favonius, with Arindolin becoming the Grand Master and gaining the title Lion of Light, and Rostam working as a knight by his side. While Arindolin was a model knight, Rostam worked often in the shadows, keeping the underground organization that was founded during the rebellion against the aristocracy alive, as well as teaching many of the knights the signature Favonius bladework style. Rostam and Rosalind also become lovers before she departs for Mondstadt to study at the Academia. During the Cataclysm, the Knights of Favonius, led by Arindolin and Rostam, go on an expedition to Conria to fight monsters. Rostam mentors a man known as the White Knight who loved justice above all else and fought against the monsters of Conria. And as he fought the monsters, he became known as the Bloodstained Knight, which caused people to fear him. He ventured deeper into Conria and continued battling monsters. In the depths of the world, he learned of the origins of the monsters that destroyed Conria and the ultimate injustice that turned the people of Conria into the monsters he fought. And therefore he joined the Abyss Order. An alchemist from Conria known as Reindotir created Durin, and she sent Durin and other creatures to Teyvat, and they began laying to waste the continent. Durin is not directly conscious or aware of the destruction he's causing, as he was simply meant to show his beauty to Teyvat, as Reindotir had ordered him to. Durin would be fatally wounded against Dvalin and Barbatos, falling onto Dragonspine where he began to poison the land. Dvalin and Barbatos are infected by abyssal corruption during this battle, and both must sleep to recuperate from their battle. During this time, the Knights of Favonius were unable to fight against Durin, which is why Dvalin and Barbatos were called upon, and Rostam was dead. And it appears as if the knights suffered heavy losses during the expedition to Conria. Rosalind returns to Mondstadt and learns of Rostam's death and turns herself into liquid flame. In her rage and despair, she travels the world for some time, killing many monsters and becoming known as the Crimson Witch of Flames, before she's ultimately recruited into the Fatui and becomes Signora. The time leading up to the present day, Mondstadt is actually rather uneventful. Thank God, you guys have no idea how much of a pain it was to write out all of this script. At some point, one of the statues of Barbatos is stolen for the Loom of Fate plan by the Abyss Order. And moving closer to our time, Kaya is abandoned and joins the Ragvindr family as a spy for the Abyss Order. Though Kaya seems to have formed genuine connections with everyone in Mondstadt and eventually becomes a Knight of Favonius himself. Grapus Ragvindr dies, attempting to protect a caravan from Ursa the Drake, which had been lured to them by the Fatui, likely at the behest of Dultide. Diluc resigns from the Knights of Favonius due to their unwillingness to investigate delusions, which is part of what killed his father, and decides to find out for himself the truth behind delusions. Kaya also revealed the truth of his existence to Diluc, causing the adoptive brothers to have a falling out as Diluc attacks him, causing Kaya to gain his vision. Diluc eventually lays to waste countless Fatui strongholds as he searches for information on delusions, and the Harbingers are forced to lay a trap for him, one that nearly kills him. He escapes due to a third-party observer from the north. This person is part of the underground network that Diluc eventually joins, and in my opinion is likely the same network that had been established in Mondstadt nearly 1,000 years prior. Eventually, Irok, the man who covered up Crepus's death, was shown to be a traitor, and Jean is tasked with rooting out all of his allies from the Knight of Favonius and protecting Mondstadt from the Abyss Order. As she does this, Jean gains her vision. Lisa also returns from Sumeru Academy, having graduated and grown disillusioned with the academy. She becomes the librarian of Mondstadt. About 3.5 years before the start of the game, Varka, the current Grand Master, sets up plans for an expedition that he wants many of the knights to go on in 3 years' time. It's around this time that Reindotir appears again with Albedo, entrusting Albedo to uncover the truth and meaning of this world, giving him an introduction letter to Alice, who takes Albedo in. Albedo joins the Knights of Favonius so he can conduct his research, and then he becomes the chief alchemist in Mondstadt. 6 months later, Varka leads his expedition out of Mondstadt, taking most of the elite knights, the cavalry, and appointing Jean to acting Grand Master in his absence. Seamus Ped, Frederica Gunhilder, and Mika are among the named knights and church officials that go with Varka. Seamus Peg and Frederica Gunhilder being the parents of Jean and Barbara. It's shortly after this departure that Diluc returns to Mondstadt and becomes the Dark Knight hero. Around this time, an artifact is stolen from a temple. Supposedly this artifact is a vial containing Barbatos' breath, and since then, Diluc and the Fatui have been in a buying war to get the artifact back. I imagine Pantalone specifically hates Diluc, though I have no proof of this. Finally, the most recent Ludi Harpastum occurs, and that is where we meet Kole, who escaped Dautre's experiments. She's aided by Amber and many others in Mondstadt, showing her life outside of the Fatui's grasp. Eventually, Sino is called from Sumeru to seal the Archon residue in her body, and she travels back with him to the Academia. During this, Dautre continues to fuck around in Mondstadt. I literally don't have a better word for what he's doing. He's just trying to cause as many problems as possible to destabilize Mondstadt, and for the fun of it. Homeboy is crazy. But ultimately, his plans are always thwarted by the crafty machinations of both Diluc and Kaya, and Dautre leaves Mondstadt for the time being. In the current period of the game, Mondstadt is in a sort of stalemate with the Fatui, many of the supposed diplomats forcing their way into the city, while most of the Knights of Favonius are no longer there. With Storm Terror's incident, the Fatui intended to create a situation where Mondstadt would be forced to submit to them, but thanks to our timely intervention as the MC and the awakening of Barbatos, that mission of theirs also fails. And so this is it. The entire history of Mondstadt as we understand it as of right now in 5.2. This video took a lot to get done, and a lot of research went into this, so if you guys could like or subscribe or leave me a comment so that I know I'm not screaming into the void, that would be great. I post videos every Friday, and as always, may the wind bless your travels.